Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Alka Halberg. I am part of the Cohesive Marketing team. I will be assisting the team today with the webinar as moderator. We will give it another 30 to 60 seconds to allow all the attendees to join us on this call. Great. I think we can start. So welcome to our next webinar in the Cohesive's Maximo Back to Basics webinar series. Our aim for this webinar series is to highlight existing base Maximo functionality and features that your organization may not be using today to help you maximize your return on investment. We will be presenting this content in the Maximo application suite to give you an opportunity to see MAS and specifically the managed application. Our focus for this series will be on functional topics with plans to incorporate more technical topics in the future. Note that this webinar will be recorded and distributed post-webinar. All the attendees are currently set to listen-only mode, but feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat or question box, and we will address these at the end. Should you have any technical questions or problems, please log it with the GoToWebinar technical team in the form of a question mark or help section on the panel itself. I will be handing you over to the host in a bit, but let me do a quick introduction of Cohesive. Cohesive helps owner-operators embed digital ways of working that drive operational efficiency and enhance asset performance across all stages of the lifecycle. We at Cohesive draw on core tech solutions to support our clients. These solutions include Bentley's Infrastructure Cloud, iTwin, and IBM Maximo, for which Cohesive is the largest implementer. Without further ado, let's dive in and hand you over to our host, Dave Aplinski, our Senior System Architect Consultant at Cohesive. Dave, over to you.
Hi there. So, like she just mentioned, I'm a senior system architect. I can't remember if I'm a system architect or a solution architect, but anyways, I'm senior. And I've been working with Maximo for about 12 years. Previously, I managed an installation at a municipality here in Southern Ontario. That's where I'm located. And then I've done consulting since then, moving more and more on the technical side. I've done reporting work, both as on the user side, trying to figure this out on my own. And I've also done training on this before and helped people out with this before. So what we're going to do today, we are going to talk a little bit about reporting in Maximo in a general sense, and then we're going to move into using query by example or ad hoc reporting. There's a couple different ways to refer to it. I'm going to call it ad hoc reporting for this purposes. We'll talk about how to create these and how to work with these, and then do a demonstration. After the demonstration, I'll talk a bit about some best practices and how to manage this and how to make this really work well in a production situation. And then we'll see if there's any questions at the end of this for anybody. So when we're talking about Maximo reporting, the biggest thing is that if you want a serious report done in Maximo, you're using the BERT tool for that. And by serious, a report is something that's showing in these screenshots here. The as shipped reports that come with Maximo are all developed within the BERT tool. Now, the BERT tool is very powerful. It's an open source and free tool. It is a little bit difficult to really work with, though. You need to have some JavaScript knowledge and some tricks and techniques to be able to work in it. But once you have figured out, it is very powerful. In that as well, in the JavaScript tool, you can, in the BERT tool, you can do some graphics, you can do charts and so on in there, but we're not talking about that today. Instead, what we're going to talk about is this query-based reporting or ad hoc reporting, which is done within the UI itself. And I hope everybody that's on this call here has in fact tried this or has some experience with it, but if you haven't, that's fine, we'll work through that. So the benefit of this, of course, is that you don't need to know JavaScript, you don't need to install and configure this BERT tool to be able to do it. You can do it all within the UI within Maximo. With that in mind, there are limitations for it, and I'll talk about those as I go through. you'll quickly run up against those when you're trying to do anything more complex almost than a list with some very simple calculations. However, you can go a long way with just that. So some of the things you can do with that, you can select columns and sort them and group them. You can identify a query against that, and quite often when you're doing any kind of reporting, half the battle is working out what query you're going to use. A well-designed query gets you most of the way towards a well-designed report. I've said it doesn't have technical or developmental skills such as SQL or Java. Um, SQL, though, structured query language for databases, is kind of useful when you're developing the query you're working with, but we can get around that too, and I'll demonstrate that when we're doing the report. Um, it's much quicker. It doesn't consume development hours. If you are in a corporate situation with a corporate IT group that is doing the development for you, this does give you the benefit to do this work yourself without having to uh, request and wait for that work to be done. It can also give you a starting point towards something you can give to your corporate IT group to do the work. So now the advantages of it, I've said it's user-friendly, flexible, it's real time, so you can create it, run it, edit it, go back. You can customize what you want to get out of it in terms of fields and sorting and so on. It's role-based, so there is some security on this. So you can grant and remove this uh, by role base within security. You can grant the ability to create reports through security groups, and the reports themselves you can either grant to everyone or grant to only some security groups. I'll talk a little bit about that more as we go on. I've mentioned the reduced dependence on Maximo admins. Report design and report writing can be pretty time consuming from their point of view. Um, and there also seems to be a never-ending list of work that needs to be done on the reporting side. So if there's some of that that you can do yourself, that will make everybody's life easier. I've talked about security, and I've also talked about the rapid prototyping, how you can create a quick report and then go back and edit it. Talk a little bit here about some of the query things that will help you, but I'm going to do that a little more when I do the demo. These are just some quick fixes to help when you're doing a find within the grid of an application. The biggest ones I use myself regularly are the equal to and not equal to, but you can also use the greater than and less than as well in some cases. Um, we'll do a little bit more on queries once we're in the application. So one thing I'm going to talk about here and get into more when we get into the report design itself is something called report object structures. So what is an object structure? It is a definition in Maximo of data relationships. So there's a pile of those out of the box. They're used in three areas. They're used for reporting, which is what we're going to deal with it. They're used for integration, and they're used for migration packages. Migration packages are what moves data from one system to another or one environment to another. So if I want to move configuration data from my test environment to a production environment, I'd use migration packages. But back to reporting object structures. In an object structure, I have a parent and I have a children. I have one or more child, and I have a relationship between those. Out of the box, there's quite a few of them. And when I do a sample report here in a few minutes, I'll show you out of the box for work order and where you see those. But you may find that there is data that you need that you can't get through the out of the box object structures. It's not unusual to create new report object structures. It is an admin thing. It's something that you'd have to go to your Maximo admin group to do, or you can do yourself if you're blessed with the ability to do that. But we'll talk about it pretty briefly. It's a little bit beyond this back to basics, but it's something to be aware of, okay? So some of the fields when we are working with, we'll walk through some screens and some background on how we actually go in and create a report. First of all, you have the run reports option. I just realized this morning when I was working through this that when you go to run a report, you can create the report down at the bottom here. There's often on this menu on the side here, there is a create report option as well. If you don't see this, it's because you don't have security access to it. And you'll have to put a request to have that granted to you. So out of the box, it depends on some installations will disable that. A lot of them will allow that with by default, but it depends on your own installation you're working with. Your first request when you go into creating an ad hoc report is what kind do you want? Do you want a list report or a detailed report? And I'm going to go into the differences as I go through. In the next couple slides, we'll talk about what's the difference between a list and a detail. It'll say, do you want to save the application query to the report? Means whatever you currently have for a query in that application is what's saved to the report. Quite often you want that actually. If you go into work order tracking, for instance, click find and then go and say create a report, whatever that default query is, usually it's something that might be like, show me all my work orders except all the work orders for my default insert site, then that's going to be your default query on your report. So before you go to create a report, make sure that you have the query you want to work with. I'll talk a little bit about report design, I think, later too, because it's important to have all of that in mind before you start designing a report. You need to give it a title, and this share button means it creates security that grants it to everyone. And I would be cautious doing this out of the box because of two reasons. One of them is it may not be suitable for everybody, or you may not want everybody to run it. But also, when you share it like this, it limits your ability to run it, to edit it after you run it, I mean. So what I would do is create the report, and quite often it's an iterative process where you run it and go, oh, everything, I can't include these fields because it all cuts off on the side, so I got to take a couple out and so on. Once you've got it happy, then you can share it. If the share button's not available when you edit it, you can go over to report administration, and in that you can find the report and you can share it. If I have time, I'll show you how to do that. So what's those two different kinds of reports? A list report is the very basic one line per whatever my application is showing. This is asset by GL account in the screenshot here. Each asset gets a line. You can export this to Excel, and quite often that's what people are using these reports for. They're using them to create something, a combination of fields that I can then export into Excel to do pivot tables on or do any kind of analysis I need to do. I'd say of the ad hoc reports I've done, the vast majority of them are list reports, and probably will be for you too. A detail report is when I have a parent and a child. So each of these relationships underneath, and I've already introduced the concept of report object structure. I have a parent asset up in the top here, and these are some fields from my parent asset, and these are my details underneath it. So each of these is a detailed field underneath it. So in order to do that, I need to have an object structure that has this multiple relationship. It's something called cardinality. Cardinality is a database term that refers to how many people do I have between my parent and a child for a relationship. If I have a single cardinality, then it's a one-to-one relationship. If it's a multiple cardinality, as I see right here, then it's a one-to-many relationship. Okay. As I said, tell you the truth, I don't even think I've done any detailed reports. I've always ever just done the list. Now, after we've done our style, that's the first one that we've talked about. The second, and as you do, as you walk through these, you're now picking the fields that we have that we want to include on the report. When I mentioned report object structures, I'll bring that up again, is this parent category controls this is in a way, what I'm picking here is my report object structure. And when I do a demo, I'll show I can change this, and it will give me there'll be 4 or 5 options in here. Each of those are a report object structure. And each of these report object structures have parent. My parent is work orders, and my children underneath that. I can pick down in my report a combination of parents and children. In some cases, I may be limited in what I can pick if it's a one-to-many relationship. But even if it's a one-to-many, I think it will still show me if I'm doing a line-by-line report and I do a one-to-many, I think it will just report the first example it retrieves. But if I'm doing a one-to-many, then whatever the multiple is down here. We'll talk a little bit. This shows much better in a demo, and I'll do that at that point. When you do go into this content, you'll have some default fields that are always picked in here. Often what I'll do is just remove all of these and then add them in one at a time. When I look at this, what I'm seeing is if I, for instance, click on asset, oops, I shouldn't click on it because that will actually take my next slide. Let's go backwards. If I click on asset, then it will show me my asset attributes here, which I then can highlight and bring down into the report at the bottom. Calculate fields lets me calculate a field that would be inline on the report. This is not something like a grand total. Instead, this would be something where if I needed to calculate a variance between my actual, I'll use this example of actual cost of internal labor. If I have an estimated cost of internal labor and an actual cost of internal labor, I can do a calculate to give me a variance, and that would be in the line. Okay. Summarize, though, lets me do grand totals and lets me, you can see some of the functions that are here by default that I can pick from. Quite often I'll throw a count in there just for reference purposes of how many people I have coming back. This is often displayed, I think, at the very top, and we'll throw one of these in. We'll throw a count in on the example that we do, and you'll see where it shows up. On the Format tab, I have the ability to add filtering in here. And I'm sorry, picture is kind of stretched on this monitor. Sorry about that, but we can still read it. Filtering gives, in a way, replaces the default query or augments the default query with additional fields I can select. So if I add filter on status, it would give me the ability to pick work order statuses to include on that report. Grouping will group similar attributes, so I could group by status, and sorting overrides or augments any sorting that might be in the query, but also would let me sort fields in there. Now, one of the tricks in here, if I remember right, is that if I want to be able to sort a report, I actually have to include the field on that from my past experience. There is a way as well to sort in your query too. So when you're done that, you preview a report. Often what I'll do is just run and save it, take a look, and then go back and edit it again, which is something you can do. Now let's pop over into the Maximo application suite and we'll do a sample. Okay, so I'll go back, log into our demo. Now this is I think MAS 9.1. So you're seeing the latest and greatest here. Like I said, I was going to do a demo with work order tracking. And what we did in those slides, you notice I have a create report option here, which you may or may not see depending on your security rights, but I'll do run reports and then I can create a report from here. I'm going to do a simple list report. Now, I haven't got a query in here right now, and I may want to do that. So I'm going to cancel this actually and talk a little bit about queries. If you don't know SQL, you should. If you're working in an application like this, you should, and I've said that to many people. You should, because it unlocks a whole pile of power features in here that you can work with. But if you don't, you can always, of course, use more search fields. I can come in here and I can say, and give you a trick, I don't even know where the status field is in here. There it is, status. So I can come in and say, I only want to see approved and in progress work orders. Okay. When I talk about SQL, how can I work with that? I'll come into and show my where clause. Now, I'll just go back to where I was there. Up in the corner, this is moved in mass, and I have to say that I'm still not completely used to it, but I'll go up here and say, where's I'll view my where clause. This is another thing that may not be available to you, but most clients allow it. So here's my resulting SQL query from what I just did. I mentioned that you can very easily add a sort in here. You can do that by going order by WONUM. Or I could do order by report date or order by any number of things. So I now have a query. Let's go back in and look at that. I now have a query in here that I can use as my starting point for this. So basically I'm showing my improved or in progress work orders, and let's change this order by report date ascending. So there's ASC and DESC, ascending and descending. After a while, if you're not familiar with what these attributes are, I'm going to show you a trick on this. If I don't know what I should put in here, I can go down and find my dates. For instance, what is target start date? You can do Alt-I, will show you what that is. Work order dot target start date. Targ start date, I'm sorry. So there's a trick, free trick. You didn't even know you signed up for that today, but here we are. So let's just verify that our query is still right. Good. So I have a query now I want to use. And let's go back to where we were. We'll create a report. There we go. It's going to be a list report. I do want to save this application query to the report. I'm going to call it Dave's. And the share button. The share button I'm not going to do right now. I'll talk about how I can share this out at the end of this demo. Now let's go over to content. Now this brings up, again, I wanted to talk about, brings up some defaults. Up in the top here is where my object structures are. So if you don't see what you like, you can come in here and expand. So work order details is the report object structure we started with right here. But you know what's missing from here? I don't see any of my planned information or my actual information. I don't know planned labor and I don't know actual labor. So I can come in here and say, I want work order details with action plans. Now I'm just going to pause for a second and show if you change the parent category, the selected fields are removed. Any changes you've made are deleted because it's saying, listen, these fields you have down there may not be valid anymore. So I got to get rid of them and we're going to start over. So obviously if you don't change horses midstream here, this is the kind of thing you do starting, and then you should know what you want to work with before you get into it. So you notice when I change that to work order details with actuals and plans, I have a different list here. I still have assets and locations. I think that they were both present before, but I now have planned labor, actual materials. Back to the relationships we talked about. My cardinality between work order, that's what my top level is. I know that because if I add in, you see it brings in, I know it's work order because that's the application I'm working in. Let me remove that. If I go down to asset, and I bring in something here, and I think it's actually going to give me an error. Yes, that's right. Let me just show you what I've got here. If I go down to asset, it shows me fields from asset. If I try to bring one of those in, it's going to give me an error. Expected error. It says you have to have something from the parent first before you do that. So let's go back to the parent, and we'll bring in work order. Actually, it's work space order num. There it is. And we'll bring in description. Now, I want to bring in information for my asset. Let's bring in my asset. I know that after you work with Maximo for a few years, you just know it's asset num. Now, and the other thing I want to bring in from asset is description. Now, here's where I would stop, and I would come in here and change this description, because you can do that. And go back to the parent. We'll bring in status. And there's 10 different statuses. So what I want here is equal status to bring up my one that I know I want. Okay. And then I want to go back to asset and bring in equal status. I think it's the same. Yeah. All right. So there's a basic report that we're going to do here. Notice as I go through, it says, here's my value. This is that short description I just did a second ago with Alt-I. And then my category is saying, where is this data coming from? So this report I have is a mix from work order, that's what work order details refers to, and asset. Now let's go to calculate. We'll talk about how to do a calculation in here. So in my calculation, I need to go in and I go and I do, there we go. These are some default functions you can use in here. If you wanted to round things to a particular field, I could go in and add round. And in where it says field, I would type in what my field is. So if I wanted to round my actual labor to 2 decimal places, such as this actual labor cost, I needed to actually type it in here. And it's always, anytime you see test expression in Maximo, take advantage of it. And how do I add that then? I will go act labor. Okay, I need to assign what that variable is going to be in my report, and I need to define what that is. Okay, it's a decimal, I know that here. But the other alternatives I could have, it could be a date or a date time, could also be a integer, but we'll take decimal in this case. And I think most of the time when you're working here, it is a decimal. Add selected should add that to my report. No, I have to do actually add expression, I'm sorry. So this is now included, and it will be one of the lines. I think it'll add it to the right side of my report. Okay. Now, what I have done here as well, if you go in your system, you won't see subtract date. That's something I actually created for this. So I could do, and at the end of this report and in the Q&A section, I actually have a link in there that is pretty useful. It has some of these functions, some of these information, how I can add expressions into here if I want to do more complicated calculations. Subtract date would let me calculate how old something is. So let's go in there. I've got date. I know something I happen to know is and equals sorry, and date time and gives me the current date time. And I could go dates field and I could put report date in here. Okay. And I think that will give it to me in days. It'll be a huge number. So I'll put it in as a decimal and we'll add that as well. See what we get back from that. On the summarize, lets me add information at the bottom. I'm just going to add in a count of, if I'm doing count, something to be, I can first of all I can do a total of, let's do an easier one. Let's do total of actual labor cost. Same situation here, we add values. If I do count, say I want to know how many records I have in my report, it's important to use a field that always will have a number in it for that, always have a value. And a good one for that is every table in Maximo has an ID, unique identifier, no matter what. So I know that every record that gets returned will have a work order ID in there. I could also use WONUM in there too, because every record in work order has a work order number, but I know this one for sure. So I'll add that. And under format, I'm not going to do much in here. Frankly, I have never done much in here, but if I was to add filter on status, okay, it's presenting me the fields that I can filter on. Now, interestingly, you notice what's not in here? None of my subsidiary fields are in here. So I mean by that, asset status is not in here, asset description and asset number itself from all of those from the asset table aren't in here, but I could filter by status as well. I really rarely, if ever, use this, any of these. So I'm not going to cover those in today. As I said, if I go sort report by, the fields I can sort by are only the fields that are in my report currently. So if I wanted to sort by something else, such as report date or something like that, which is what we did, I think we sorted by report date. I don't want that in the report though, so I tend to do all of that in the SQL. So let's run and save that. Let's see what we get back here. This is a second where you go, oh, this is taking too long. And look at that, pop out blocked. How unprofessional. So I did notice that I had a little thing pop up in the top here saying a pop out was blocked. So I don't know why that was. I enabled it, and you may run into that as well when you first run a report on your system. Now let's go back into run reports. Here is my report again, and we'll run it again. Notice I do have the edit field, and this takes me back to that series of 5 tabs, and I can go in and edit it again if necessary. So when I go to run a report, I can, and I'm sure everybody on this call has done this before, I can schedule it. I can say run it recurring at this point. I can say run it, and I'm always impressed with the how I can pretty much through this form here set up to any combination of recurrence that I could ever need. So, the first Sunday of every month. But we're going to do though, and when you do pick recurring, it will say what you need to email it to because you don't have the ability to run it and present it in the UI. So it's a email that you get to it. But instead, we're going to do immediate and submit. And what I was saying before I noticed that pop-up took place, I realized that we're going to run this on 8,000 records, which is a little bit heavy, but not too bad. So it'll take a second here for this to come through. Often this is when you realize just what you've done. So let's look at what's in here. I see there's my grand total for actual labor. There's the count. So I said 8,000, but it's actually 5,000, so I must have read that wrong. As we go across, we've got descriptions, assets, asset location, or asset description, I'm sorry, status. There's my actual labor field that we had, which was rounded. And there is my aging in days. So if I want that in years, we can do that a different way. So let's do that. If we want to do this in years, just to finish up editing this, and then we'll move to a couple of other pieces of software. So if I go in and I want to edit this, and I want to convert days to years, I go back to my calculate, and I have to edit this. I have to edit this. There. No, I want to edit the second one. Thank you. And we are going to edit this as, put another brackets around it. So we're going to edit the result of that whole calculation and divide it by days. We're going to put it to 365. While that's running, I'll say what we're going to do next. We're going to talk about security on this because I could now, if I'm at a report that I'm happy with, and I'm saying, okay, this report's so awesome that I want everybody to be able to use it. Yeah, that didn't work quite the way I wanted to. We're going to leave that for now, but you understand what we can do there. That report is pretty awesome, though, I got to say. And so what I want to do now is share it with everybody. So I don't have the ability to share it here. Okay. I thought I did, but I don't. But what I can do instead is cancel. And I'm going to go now to an application you may or may not have access to called Report Administration. Now, in Report Administration, there's a few things we can do in here. And this is one that, like I said, it's that we're into some system administration stuff now at this point. And let's look for Dave's awesome report. And in here is where I can set security. Right now, there's no security in here. But if I want everybody to be able to use this, I can come in here and there is, I think there is, there better be. Don't make me look silly here. I can grant this to a security group, but I understand where I don't think I have the ability to grant it to everyone, but there is an everyone security group that I can grant to in here. And then that gives it the ability to everybody. Now, of course, I can also give that to different groups. If I want to just give it to something called a maintenance crew, maybe only for max admin group or for a supervisor group. Okay, this is now in the area where if you don't have the ability to do this yourself, this is now more in the Maximo administration group, and quite often that would be, an IT ticket or something, a request like that. One important point with this, though, once I save this and grant it to the supervisor group, if I go back to work order tracking, find my awesome report, and I try to edit it, because I can't edit it. This is the same thing I said that back with the share, back when when you said you want to share it, it creates a security record in there for everyone. And because we just granted it for the security group, I can't edit it. How do I get around that? I go back to port administration, find awesome, and I just delete that. Save, and if we go back now to work order tracking, I can edit it. Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about was object structures. Okay, so let's now talk about report object structures very briefly, because it's important to understand this. Because if we look at the report work we just did in work order, very quickly, if you start designing this, you'll go, I can't find what I'm looking for. I want to find a labor reporting report where I can show the labor record for the person and their default craft and then the last hours they worked. Well, you won't find an easy way of doing that. We are now again into the administration area, so you may not have access to this. But if I go in here and say consumed by report, it will bring up my report object structures. They all start with REP. And if we go report work order, we'll see the ones we just did. Work order details and work order details with actuals and plans. So let's look at this work order details with actual plans. What do I have in here? I have 21 different tables in total that's in there. So that's interesting. We'll go back and look at that in a second. Work order is my parent. We know that. And then underneath that, there is asset underneath it. We took from asset. If we expand asset, we can see the relationship. It's work order is my parent, asset is my child. This is the relationship between, and this is SQL. Woe underscore asset, where my asset number equals the asset number in question. That's what the colon notation means, and my site ID is site ID. I've talked about cardinality here. Here in my cardinality is single. So if I go back to that example I talked about where I want a labor report that shows me details on my labor. I want to know when we hired them. I want to know this person's full name and this person's other details that could be in the labor record. I also want to know the last time this person worked. So my relationship to LabTrans, which is the labor reporting field, would have SQL in there with a show me his or her last work date. Okay. So it's important to understand this. I'm not going to talk too much more about this. Let's go back to the presentation and talk about, after the demo, we'll talk about some best practices. Know the limits on record counts for QBRs. Now, I wouldn't say we ran into it there, but you do end up with a situation where you could run a report on hundreds of thousands of records and maybe not bring the system to its knees, but certainly you'll be sitting for a long time before that gets back. My experience is anything over, say, 50,000 records, and you'll start to time out on it. In that situation, if you still need that report out, if you still need that information, you can run that as a scheduled report and have it emailed to you and schedule it. And everybody would appreciate it, from administrations and everybody else you work with. Schedule that to run that overnight, assuming you have an off-peak period. Um, I've talked about available fields and relationships in there. You can have custom relationships to bring back information if that you may need in a unique situation. Remember, when you're doing a report, you don't need to create new ones, but you also can do that drop down to bring up and show other report object structures you can work with. Obviously, test them before sharing. I've shown how to test and modify it, but also be able to keep it just for yourself, but then make a request to IT or on your own, if you have ability in report administration, to be able to um, grant it to other security groups to run. Okay. Now, interestingly, this report is a BERT report at the end of the day. So if we go back to report administration, and report administration is under administration, but there's so much in here, I just type it in it or find it. So if we go back to Dave's awesome report, and it is pretty awesome, you from in here can export this. This export we've just done is a BERT report. This .rpt design is a BERT report that can be imported into the report designer, the BERT report design tool, and work with it there. Now, we're not going to do that because that's way beyond the scope of what we're talking here, but that's a example. Now, the other things we can do within report administration, I talked about security, but in here, you notice it shows what query is running on this, and you can modify the query. Okay. Can you? I'm not sure. Yeah, you can change who assigned it, but I don't think you can modify from here actually. But that's a different thing we're not going to get into. You can limit records. So in here you can say how many records you can run this on. Some reports, if you have a report with multiple complex relationships, it can really chug. And so you may want to say limit this to 5,000 work orders. Okay. Now, the other thing, if we set up parameters for filters, it would show up down here as well. We didn't do that. Let's go back to the report because there's one other thing we do want to talk about. Cancel. When I go to run a report, and I'm sure everybody knows how to do this, but I can run it into Excel and have it emailed to me. So I can do at this time, and I can say my output, I want it to be Excel. XLSX is what I want, which is a much smaller file size than XLS. Okay. If I wanted that then I think that's the only way I can do it. So I can say run at this time, and then, although I think wait a minute, from the reviewer, I forgot about this, from the viewer, I can export it from here, either as CSV, or I can export the report from here into PDF or into XLS. As I said, try the XLSX because it's a much smaller file. So probably sometimes it can be about 10 times smaller in size. Okay. Or I can run the report, and when I run the report, I can specify what I want it to be. Let's go back to the presentation now. Okay, so we talked about security, personal versus public. Some of the best practices, please use descriptive titles. Dave's awesome report is not a good title, in case you didn't know. I would put something in there like, actual labor by report date or something similar to that. So that if someone else, if you share it with everyone and someone else stumbles on it, they know what it is. Or if it had been stumbles on it, they know whether it should be kept or not. The more fields you have, the slower it will run. And sometimes you will find that you're waiting minutes for your more complicated reports. Grouping and summaries also will cause additional slowness. And I seem to be harping on slowness here, but if you are in an environment with hundreds of thousands of work orders and you want to do something complicated, you can have reports that run hours and hours and hours. Okay. Before scheduling, make sure it runs correctly, and then manage security from report administration. I think we're good with 15 minutes left for questions. So before we go over to questions, 1 second, is I do want to say this report, there's a number of Maximo support pages out there, including a fairly good Word document for questions. This one in particular is a quick reference sheet that is kind of valuable for some of the quick things that we did here today. I'll let you go over for questions. I can't hear you, Elke. I can't hear you.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you for that informative session, Dave. Really appreciate it. So it doesn't look like we have any questions. So with that, then I want to conclude this webinar. Thank you, Dave, for joining us today, as well as your attendees for listening. If you want to reach out to Dave or the team at Cohesive, you can do so via our website or via LinkedIn. Note we have all the previous webinars available on YouTube. This recording will also be made available to you on our channel. So that is a wrap for today. Please register and join us for our upcoming webinar on May 15th with the topic Job Plan Sequencing. Dave, thank you again, and I wish everyone a great day.
Thank you. All right. Okay.
Thanks.
And we done. Are we done?
Yeah, we're done.
We kicked everybody out.